Hello, and welcome to episode number 243 of the Board Game Barrage podcast, a podcast about board games, the latest hotness, and how to have fun with your friends, even when you're losing. I recorded a banger of an episode that everyone would have loved, top 5 ever, and Neelan decided he wanted to seppuku out of the audio track so that you would not love me more. So here we are recording the episode again.
Speaking of losing things...
It's kind of wild. We literally got 95% of the way through the episode when my computer blew up.
And we have a photo of you
4.5 years.
Ostriching downward to go, oh no, what has happened? And then you froze and DC'd, and here we are doing it again. And so it's a little weird, right? Because Mark and Neelan have already heard all the amazing jokes that I had.
We promised to laugh just as hard as the first time.
Maybe you could laugh more times, on a redo, because it's a commitment. So rather than telling you what today's episode is about, I will start with a quote from someone I didn't know, but now do know, is a football coach, Doug Peterson. An individual can make a difference, but a team can make a miracle. Today on the show, we will learn about the miracle of team games.
Just aside for the listener, wait until the end of the episode to get a very, very interesting Doug Peterson fact that I used at the end of our last episode. So rather than deprive listeners this time around, I'm just going to let you know in advance. If you want a good, hot Doug Peterson fact, it's going to happen at the end of the episode.
Oh, dear. I fear that this is going to be very funny for us and very confusing for all listeners. But before we get to the miracle of team-based games, we're going to be talking to you about the games that we have played this week. Mark is going to tell us about Art Decko. I am going to talk to us about Feed the Kraken Deluxe Edition, and Neelan will talk to us about War of the Ring, the card game. Mark, you know what I noticed? Art Decko is a pun, because it's a deck building game. D-E-C-K-O,
wow,
Art Decko.
Kellen. That's incredible. I hadn't noticed that.
Kellen is really quick on those
so
things.
Smart.
You can't get those by him. Any subtle little thing, he picks it up immediately. So,
why don't you tell us about Art Decko?
I would love to. Art Decko is a game by Tate Wu, which was originally known as Promenade, that has been released by Rio Grande. Promenade, the original version, is also about acquiring art and showing them in museums. And the board game seems to have not changed too much from that edition. So it's a bit interesting that this second edition seems to be just about a little bit of a sprucing up of the art and a name change, not even a retheme, which is sort of funny that a whole edition will come out, which basically equates to just a name change. Anyhow, as far as the game itself, in Art Decko, you play as an art collector / speculator trying to acquire the best pieces of art and manipulating the art market. The way this manifests itself mechanically is in the form of this interesting combination of deck builder with a stock market aspect and a touch of area control. Kellen?
What? This is like Inception. I don't know. Okay. This was the part of the previous record of the Lost episode where I cued in to what Mark was saying because it was boring. It was boring. Right. Then he said the magic words of that combination of mechanisms. Yeah. And then I started paying attention.
Right.
It seems more exciting than I thought it was going to be based on those mechanisms.
Well, wait till you hear more about it. Here it comes.
But...
The Deck Builder Plus Something Else has been a popular gimmick in board gaming for a couple of years now. From Clank to Great Western Trail to Dune Imperium, not only has it been done often, but as those games make clear, it's also been done quite well. So I was a little apprehensive about what Art Decko might have to offer, especially when seeing it was relatively light. Not that I don't appreciate light games, it's just when a certain spin on games has been done so much, it's hard to find innovation on the lighter side of iteration, I think. But the way Art Decko works is that you'll start with a hand of art cards and gold cards. As you might guess, the gold cards are mostly the currency that you'll be using to buy more art cards. However, the interesting twist is that you can also use those art cards to buy art cards or as currency. The art cards come in 5 types. There's pop art, Renaissance art, Surrealism, Art Nouveau, and Impressionism. Besides the art and the type of cards, there's no difference between any of the pop art cards or any of the Renaissance cards or surrealism cards, etc. That is to say, unlike a game like Dominion, where you've got gold cards on one hand and then you've got action cards on the other hand, and all the action cards are different, every single one of the 5 types of art cards in Art Deco is identical, making it pretty easy to teach and play. As I said earlier, you can use your art cards instead of gold to buy things, but the value of the different types of art depends on how hot that particular type of art has been. So if you've got a hand full of pop art and the value of pop art has risen a bunch, those cards become very valuable, not only for the game and scoring, should you be able to hold on to them, but also for use in-game instead of gold. The area control aspect of the game comes into play with the ability to play cards out of your hand and into 5 different museums on the board. So it's not really so much of an area control as it is a bit of like intermediate scoring while also potentially influencing the end game scoring. The way that works is you play cards into the museum, which will score you points immediately and will make the type of art that you played more valuable. But more interestingly, there will be a randomly assigned end of game scoring bonus assigned to each museum, but that will only trigger if the museum is filled. So, for example, if a certain museum says every pop art at the end of the game is worth extra 3 points, you might want to make sure that you take the time to fill that museum before the game ends, therefore triggering that end of game scoring. For all that's going on in Art Deco, I think it does deserve its medium weight score on BGG. It sounds a little maybe heavier than it actually is. There are a lot of interesting choices to make, but the game still moves pretty quickly. The fact that so many of the cards are basically just identical aside from being one of 5 different suits makes it so that there's not a lot of having to figure out what the different cards do, not have to worry about a lot of rules or a lot of edge cases. I also really like the stock market system and the way that I could engineer things so that the cards I was acquiring could rise in value made my deck feel stronger in a pretty organic way. So, I'm engineering the types of cards I have in my deck to get more and more valuable as opposed to just like buying a high-end card. I thought was a cool way to strengthen your deck. Just a surprisingly robust game in a very beautiful package, as you might expect from a game about art. And I'm always a sucker for economic-based games in general. So if you're going to offer me another deck-building hybrid, this is right up my alley, and it's one that I'd recommend. So that is Art Deco by Tate Wu and Rio Grande Games.
It's like I dismissed this originally as just sort of like lighter faff, that, the things that just sort of come out that some people play and you hear about. But like there's a little bit more going on here.
Yeah, that's what I thought of it initially too, like sort of a forgettable midweight Euro sort of thing.
Yeah.
I didn't know initially that it was a deck builder, and then when I found out it was a deck builder, my expectations were even lowered more because, again, deck builder plus something else has been done so many times that I just didn't think it'd be very interesting. But this was really good. I really liked it. It did feel like a fresh entry into that deck builder hybrid arena, so I'm happy about it.
I have the same reaction whenever I hear something as a deck builder that I am a little bit put off by that, but yeah, this game is on Board Game Arena, so we should at the very least check it out. That's a fun fact that we learned last record. But yeah, I think at the very least, if you're saying that it gets past that barrier of just being another deck builder, then that sounds like something we should definitely check out.
Yeah, I would love to play that on BGA for sure. Didn't realize it was there, but I did when you told me last time.
It is a complete mind. People are coming to the table with fun facts that are from other people's brains. I don't know what's happening. Oh my God.
I did have the thought that this would have been the perfect thing to happen last week on the Second Chances episode.
A second recording?
Alas. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you didn't do it then. Glad you saved it.
Yeah. I'll wait until a more appropriate topic next time.
Perfect.
All right. Neil and I had the opportunity to play a new social deduction game that is just coming to Kickstarter backers right now. It is called Feed the Kraken Deluxe. This is a take on the Resistance or Secret Hitler with more and pirates and fluff and ridiculousness. Instead of just 2 teams, there are now 3 teams: the sailors, the noble sailors, the evil pirates, and the, who can say, cultist
Right.
leader.
Misunderstood cultist.
The misunderstood cultist leader, the yellow faction. And there is a hexagonal board. I just love saying hexagonal because I say it in a way that other people might not understand, but is still technically accurate if you look at the lineage of the word hexagonal. Okay, so we're playing the deluxe version. Even in the non-deluxe version, there's a giant 3D ship that looks really cool. You owe it to yourself to look at this on Board Game Geek. The TLDR is like, we were trying to play a less than 9-player version of this game, but everyone just kept looking at the components, wanting to play and refusing to give up their spot in Feed the Kraken because it looks so fun. So the ship is at the bottom of the board, and each turn you're resolving a mission, just like Resistance or Secret Hitler, and that is going to determine where the boat is going. The good guys want to go east, because east is a direction of nobility. The pirates, the evil people, want to go west, towards this one specific location, and the cultists want to head right up the middle. If, in fact, you reach the end of the board for any of those, that team wins the game. So the way in which this is done is most similar to Secret Hitler, with a little bit more. Someone is the captain. That captain will choose a navigator and a lieutenant. And those people are sort of nominated for the mission. But before they can go on the mission, there is a gun game or a gun. There is.
No, I
There's
know.
a game of guns.
That's true.
Instead of the voting system which exists in the Resistance, here you have a gun economy where everyone starts the game with 3 guns, and depending on the player count, you will 3, 2, 1 reveal guns, and if there are enough guns, a mutiny has happened, and then a new captain is chosen, and the whole mission is scrapped. A very important rule that I want to get out of the way here, and this rule, Nealon is very adamant about everyone following at the table. Very, very adamant. And this is right from the rule book, that when the captain nominates people, he then has to say, the captain has to ask the crew about their loyalty, and this is in quotes, so it's part of the rules. If you are not satisfied with my decision, let your guns speak! Exclamation mark. So every round of this game, of which there are many, Nealon would bother people and say, oh, you didn't say it, so we can't vote yet. Oh,
We're going to play a game. We should play it right.
That's right. So it's very important that if you're playing this game, that when you get to the question of loyalty phase, which is obviously, sort of subsection 2 of the navigation phase of the game, you must say the sentence, blah, 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 satisfied with me, let your gun speak, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great.
Nealon, is it acceptable to say blah, 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 as Callan did?
No, I don't think that's in the rules. Absolutely.
But I was changing it to like, if I'm not satisfying to you, then like show me your guns, and stuff like that. Just to kind of get under Nealon's skin.
Perfect.
If you wanted it done by the rules. Okay, and so if not enough guns are flashed, then there are cards dealt. 2 cards to the captain, 2 cards to the lieutenant, who will each choose 1 each. So there'll be 2 cards handed to the navigator, and the navigator has an even more important job of selecting the 1 card that is chosen among the 4 cards that have been brought forward by both the captain and the lieutenant. On a card is a direction, either a clearly labeled eastward and blue, a negative evil labeled westward and red, or a up north and yellow direction. In addition, there are symbols on the cards that have sort of LOL crazy powers on them. So the way that they're resolved is the boat moves. Any action that happens on the space the boat lands will also happen. And then any action on the card will happen. And this makes for a more interesting discussion phase than you might otherwise happen, because it's not just a case of passing or failing. You may actually want to go an errant way as the good team because you're going to get more information about where you land. Or you really don't want to put a card in that has the cultist symbol on it, which is going to give the cultist more powers in the game. So it is a multi-layered decision on what you will do. The last thing that I think is important, there are character powers. Everyone has a one-time use power that they don't have to reveal till they flip it over, which of course is hilarious. And there is the cultist faction, who the cultist leader has 2 ways to win: get to 1 middle spot in the middle, which is pretty hard to do at the end, or if they get killed and fed to the Kraken near the end of the game, they win the game alone. So there are 3 spaces on the board near the end where you must throw someone overboard and they are out of the game forever. And so the cultist leader is trying to be that person. How they can do that? How could that be possible? Well, during certain phases of the game, if certain cards are resolved, they will get to turn other players into cultists in a night phase, and suddenly there are multiple people who are all trying to throw suspicion on Nealon and get him to be the one that is thrown overboard. Nealon was the cultist leader, just TLDR for the game. Nealon, I have done enough explaining. What did you think about Feed the Kraken Deluxe Edition?
I really like this. I think this does a lot of things that I really loved. I've often talked about just like the purity of Resistance, but even though this is just layering on more stuff, all of that stuff is fun. It gives it kind of like a non-abstract presentation where it's like, okay, if we end up here, you guys win. If we end up here, you guys win. If we end up here, this team wins. So that it just visually expands exactly how the objectives work. It gives you these like fun player powers. It actually solves a problem that I think the Resistance to Secret Hitler has, which is sometimes these votes just devolve into like lots of failed votes, by giving you this gun system where, you know, you have a limited resource to be able to overthrow the captaincy, which I think is really, really smart. And then it also like introduces something which was like this game that I played very early in the hobby called Panic Station, which isn't very good, but I always wanted to love, that has that one person's infected and they're slowly spreading the infection to other people. And that aspect of the cultist team I thought was really, really cool, where you're just trying to slowly subdue more and more of the people at the table. I thought this was great. Everyone seemed to have a good time with it. It was a good time.
It is very silly with a core that is still quite strong, perhaps thanks to it being borrowed from other games, but it also has such a table presence that I think everyone at the table, right, like wanted to play again, wanted it to be brought back. Just a really fun time. Like, here's another dumb thing, right? As the navigator, you're the one choosing the 2 cards, taking it to 1 for the card that is going to get resolved. Well, if you really don't want to do that command, you can, once per game, you're not allowed to say anything during this phase. It's like very important that you not speak, which we'll get to in the Miracle team-focused portion of this episode. But during navigation, you can say one sentence only. And it's very clear, again, in the rulebook. You can only say this sentence during this phase. That sentence is, I will not carry out these commands, but jump overboard instead. And you literally kill yourself in order to not have that navigation resolved. So if you get handed 2 negatives and the game's going to end and you're a good person, instead of saying nothing and being silent, you have to declare, I will not carry out these commands, and then you're out of the game forever, but you were a noble sacrifice. So near the end of the game, it became a game of who was willing to say, I'm willing to jump overboard, pick me for the mission. I'm willing to die for this.
That's very funny.
Which is as fun as it sounds. I would love to play more of this. Scales, you know, it's 5 to 11 players. Yeah. Mark, any questions about Feed the Kraken?
A couple. First thing is, you mentioned 5 to 11, and you played with 9. Is this a game, do you think, that would work at a lower player count, at the 5 count?
Yeah. My guess is it's probably got a sweet spot around the 7 to 10 players. When you hit 11, the cult leader starts with a cultist, for example, and when you're at 5, it whizzle-wazzles. There could be 2 sailors and 2 pirates, or there could be 3 sailors and 2 pirates. So my guess is it barely, again, works less well at 5 and at 11, but I did not want to do it at 9. I was trying to actively remove people from the game, and it worked, and we got through it, and everyone kind of understood what was happening pretty quick.
One thing that did surprise me, it has a substantially different board at the lower player count. So, you know, they've definitely given some thought to like balancing that around the smaller count. So, you know, who can say how well it really works, but yeah.
I would do it. I mean, I'd be happy to do it.
I would try it happily.
And it seems like it's a solid game in terms of like the playing and the mechanisms and everything. But as you mentioned, like one of the draws is certainly the production, which is crazy lavish for the deluxe version. Do you know what the non-deluxe version, if it even exists, looks like? And I wonder if that would be...
Yeah, I do, because I think I have all of it in the box with the other stuff. Again, like, it's hard when social deduction games can cost $10 to $15, and my guess is, you know, the base one of this costs $50, like, would be my guess, based on the components, and it still has the giant 3D ship miniature, even in the basic one. And there are actually some things about the basic that are probably easier. Your loyalty is a card instead of a chip that has to be put in a bag, which is a little annoying from a roll perspective, but it feels nice in your hand. So again, it's really clear to me that if you like social deduction, you will enjoy trying this. It feels like that sort of centerpiece of a, a game group is going to play this a lot and just laugh and laugh. And my guess is you could get a 9-player game to 45 minutes once people are really know what is happening. So that is Feed the Kraken Deluxe, and a special thank you to Second of the New. You don't know it, but this is the second time I'm thanking you for getting this game for me and muling it to Neelan. How does the theme song for Lord of the Rings go? Da, 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 da,
No.
da, 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 da.
Exactly right. War of the Ring, the card game.
Do you want me to do the song in the background while you do that?
Yeah, please, Mark. If you could just do some background Lord of the Ring ambient music. Okay, shut up. War of the Ring, the card game, is a spin-off of War of the Ring, the board game. This is a epic, very long 2-player experience based around Lord of the Rings, where one player plays as the Free Peoples, trying to get the ring to Mount Doom before the Shadow player is able to mount a defense and stop them. This is kind of somewhat faithfully reproduced in the card game version, where you have those kind of competing objectives playing out in parallel. The main difference with the card game version, and this is designed by Ian Brody, who is famous for Quartermaster General, so has some experience in card games.
You're welcome.
But with development work by Roberto de Megler, who is the original designer of War of the Ring. So there's a lot of really good pedigree here. But the key differences are that it being a 4-player game now means that it is a 2v2 team-based game. Each of those players has a deck, and that deck is unique. It represents some of the factions of Middle-earth, whether that's like the Men of Numenor and the elves, dwarves, wizards, Mordor, etc. So your deck of 30 cards is going to be used to play armies, to play characters, to play items, to either a battleground, which comes out in the round, or the path. Now, there are a total of 9 rounds, and each of the rounds sort of represents the hobbits getting closer and closer to Mount Doom. So that's represented by the path card. So if uncontested, the good team takes that card and just scores the points on it. But if the evil team attacks the path and is able to sort of overcome their defenses, then any of that excess becomes corruption, which is victory points for them. At the same time, you're also sort of trying to mount a defense or an attack on these battlegrounds. The battlegrounds start defended by one player, and specific factions are only allowed to be able to play to those battlegrounds. So, for instance, at like the Battle of Minas Tirith, if you think about this in the context of the world, in the context of the board game, the elves wouldn't be at that battle. So the elves are not allowed to be played to that battleground. There's a lot of specificity, in fact, like how you can play these cards. Like items are typically either character specific or faction specific. Even the path, if you have Aragorn in your hand, Aragorn doesn't show up in the story until like a third of the way through. So you literally can't play him to help the hobbits out in paths
after
1,
they
2,
get
3.
out of Naboo.
Exactly. So this is going to be, I think, one of the things that is kind of unique about this, but probably going to be fairly frustrating. There's a lot of very specific use cases for these cards, and frequently it's a range. So Aragorn, for example, might say you can play him anywhere between paths 3 and 9, but that still gives you some limitations. Any one of these battlegrounds that either side wins, it becomes victory points for that side, and at the end of 9 rounds, whoever has the most victory points wins. Or if you're able to get an excess of 10 points, then you could just win the game early. This kind of representing like the military victory in the original game. Otherwise, one of the things I think that is the core conceit of this, the mechanic that makes it stand out, is because of how small that deck size is. It becomes a game much more about deck management. You are, every single time you play a card, whether that's to put it on the table or do an effect, you're also cycling a card, putting it into your discard pile. And this is going to work out like deck builder style. Once you get through your deck, which is probably going to happen 2 or 3 times in a game, you're going to shuffle up that discard pile and it becomes your new deck. So it is very much about finding the right opportunity for every card you have in your hand, whether that's playing it now to be used either now or in a subsequent round, or cycling it because it's not going to be useful, maybe until 2 or 3 rounds later. Or a lot of the effects require you to just straight up eliminate cards, remove them from the game. And that even includes if you attack with a card early, it's going to be eliminated for the remainder of the game. So there's a lot of opportunity to thin down your deck. In fact, in the most recent game I played of this with our friend Daniel, In the 2-player game, you start with a 60-card deck, and Daniel was able to get his deck down to like sub 20 by the end of the game. So there's a lot of opportunity to really, really manipulate and fine-tune your deck to like exactly the cards you're going to need when you need them. I think the thing I should caveat by saying here, though, is that this is a potentially very swingy game. You're going to end up probably 1 or 2 points ahead for the win, but some turns are swingy in excess of like 4, 5, 6 points. Just if you happen to have the right combination of things at the right time to have a really strong play, and you'll know by the sound of that whether that's something that's going to be really, really frustrating for you. But it all is in service of the theme. Like it works similarly to the board game, where it's like those moments are, oh, I got Aragorn out, he's got Andoril in his hand, and he's marching on Minas Tirith, and it just works perfectly in that like beautifully like thematic way. Yeah, Kellen, we played this as a 3-player version where I was double-handing 2 of the shadow decks. What do you think, War of the Ring?
Fisting.
Yes.
That's a new joke, so that one he heard for the first time.
Yep.
So that was authentic.
That was a genuine laugh.
Yeah, that wasn't, he didn't fake that laugh. I saved that one. Okay, so I just want to start, by sort of revealing how nerdy I am. I would say my favorite Harry Potter book, Goblet of Fire. Okay, so if that helps you sort of... No, I like Lord of the Rings, right? I have seen all the movies. I bought the 4K Blu-ray. This game does a really good job of sort of... it has fantastic art, and then you're putting together these fun combinations of characters, and things are happening, and stories are being told, while having a really, maybe not unique card play system, but a very tight system where you don't get to do everything you want, and everything that you do get to do is at the cost of discarding another card and being devastated that you don't get to do that. I will say that if you aren't extremely familiar, and I mean extremely familiar with the IP, a lot of the exceptions and the, this character can only be played in ages 4 through 7, and I was playing as the Dudurians again.
Yep.
What are they called, Neelan?
The Dunedain.
Oh, the Dunedain.
Oh, yeah.
Mark, you're familiar with the Dunedain,
me and the
right?
Dunedain are like this.
Yeah, the Dunedain.
Me and the Dunedain go together like peanut butter and jelly. Sorry. I just want to clarify how close I am to the Dunedain.
Yeah, they're the best Quidditch team. And it was like every battle I could bring the Dunedain, but I couldn't bring any elves. And I'm like, why can't I do that? And Daniel's like, oh, of course they weren't there for Minas Tirith or whatever. And I'm like, what are you talking about, right? I have this buff, right? Okay? I didn't know what it was, but lembas bread, okay? This bread, okay? And it's a little buff that you give to someone. And I'm like, and I'm reading the card, it's just bread. I can feed it to the elves. I can feed it to the hobbits. That makes sense. They have mouths.
Yeah, you can play that anytime, right?
No. I couldn't give the lembas bread to Gandalf. I tried to stuff his face full of the bread, but he's a wizard class. He can't eat bread.
If you had read the appendices of the Silmarillion, you would know that, Khaled.
But it's funny too in that way where it's like, oh my God, it's Pippin and and Legolas, and they're the only ones, and they're standing up, at this like ninth path thing. So the card play is fun. The game is engaging. The art is wonderful. If you like Lord of the Rings, I think it's a must play. Definitely. I have some concern that your ability to, if you draw a hand at the beginning of the game that is all 8, 9s, and 10s, that you're going to spend a lot of time trying to just cycle your deck as opposed to someone who's just going to draw into those first things. And, to some extent that is the game, but I think it's more about telling a fun and engaging story than it is about one team just going like, I'm better than you at this game.
Yeah, and I will definitely say, just even in the limited time I've played it, the difference between playing it even that first time and subsequent times, there are not enough cards in these decks that you're not going to know them all backwards. And to be clear, all 4 of the decks are in every single game that you play of this. So it's not even a question of like variant setups or anything like that. You will see all of these cards over the course of a couple of games. And knowing that the possibilities of what every player is capable of, knowing what they could be having down the line, just enhances your ability to set up for that effectively. I do think it probably has, like every dueling card game, someone that draws really effectively at the beginning is going to be at an advantage. I do think that the game is more smartly designed around your ability to set up for later rounds than having an especially strong starting round. I can't know that for sure with my limited experience with it, but that's my take.
It's just weird because if the characters are like creatures and the path is like a battleground, the game is sort of saying, oh, those 3 creatures you drew are only relevant for battleground 8, 9, and 10. And you're like, oh, well, I wish I would have drawn some path 1, 2, or 3. And then you're forced to go to the battleground part of it or prepare your tableau for future rounds. So there are things that you're doing. It's just, it sometimes feels like there's less decisions to be made because the question is like, can I even commit to the path by virtue of what characters do I have available for this excursion?
Totally. I think it is like this interesting, if not necessarily super satisfying mix of that long-term strategic play, but also just ultimately reacting to what you have in your hand on any given round and whether you're able to use that effectively or not. And for my taste, I really dig it. It's definitely fluffy in the ways I want it to be for like a thematic game like this, but I do have similarly like long-term strategic concerns with it, but that is like the furthest thing from my mind when I'm pulling off cool Lord of the Rings
and listening to Duel of the Fates.
Yeah, in the background, exactly. One thing I do want to say really quick is this is officially a 4-player game. That is the game as designed by Ian Brody, but they've developed a bunch of official variants. Like I mentioned earlier, I played this at 2 players where you just mash the good and evil decks together. There's the 3-player variant, as well as you could just play it 2-headed like we did for one of our games where one player just 2 hands both of the decks of, like, say, the Shadow player, for example. So it comfortably handles anywhere between 2 to 4 players, but you probably want 4 players for this at its best. This was kindly provided to us by Ares as a prototype copy, for which we're super grateful, which every single card proudly proclaimed demo, largely stamped across the front of it, so just in case we ever forgot. But yeah, thank you for sending to us, and this is almost certainly one that I will likely pick up in its final form. I'm pretty smitten by it.
And to help us pivot to the episode topic, the one thing we didn't talk about is what it feels like to play the game as a team-based game, which coincidentally is the topic of our episode number 243 Omega Edition recording after the Alpha Edition that previously recorded. But before we do that, we wanted to remind you that we will be at Shucks 2022 in sunny Vancouver. Shucks is Shut Up and Sit Down's board game convention in Vancouver. It is taking place from September 30th to August 2nd. If you want to play board games with us, you should come. We will put a link in the show notes for how you can buy tickets, and we will be doing some panels and podcasting and various things. We still don't know exactly what those things are yet, but we will let you know when we know because we're excited to be a part. Guests of honor. I think actually one guest of honor, me, and then, sort of plus 2, Neelan and Mark.
Your entourage.
Oh, entourage. All right. So let us move on to the feature topic 243. That is team-based games. And specifically what I want to talk about is what team-based games feel like and how that feels different than playing solo or cooperative or competitively, and room in the board game sphere or the board game, what's that word that sporadically board uses? Milieu. The board game milieu, right?
I mean, yeah, I think that could be the word.
I don't ever listen to them, so I wouldn't know.
Okay, so team-based gaming. I think that everyone is super familiar with team-based gaming in the form of party games where you're playing on teams, and in the form of sort of more temporary alliance-based dudes on a map games where there's sort of some formal but mostly informal alliances. But I just wanted to have a discussion about what it feels like to play team-based games. What are some of your favorite examples? This is born out of both Feed the Kraken and War of the Ring, the card game, being team-based games. Who wants to kick off the Omega discussion?
I will say that as somebody who played sports growing up and still plays sports and is a fan of sports in general, that I enjoy team-based games. However, I find that my enjoyment sort of peaks when it comes to board games, when it comes to the lighter stuff like party games, things like that, where you find a lot of team-based games. And I think that a lot of team-based games that fail for me tend to be the more strategic, the more like Euro-y, the quote-unquote hobbyist games. And I wonder what that is. I wonder if that is something that is just inherent in trying to make a Euro-y game team-based, or if that's has something to do with a lack of games in the space, and maybe there's room for growth. But when it comes to party games, I don't know if it's like the visceral nature of them, the way that you usually play them by the seat of your pants, you're playing them and there's not a lot of like downtime involved. But I just think in general, I have a much higher hit rate when it comes to party games that are team-based than it comes to the heavier stuff.
I mean, I think I know what you're like putting down, but I think that it still is represented in some of my favorite heavier team games. That shared camaraderie of like the shared win or the shared loss. When something goes wrong, it's not just you that's like, oh man, you have like other teammates that are like sharing in that moment. And when something goes really, really right and you like pair up with a teammate or just get in sync with your team and everything goes perfectly. Like Gods of Atlantis is like the best case example of this for me, where in order to do effectively, in order to kill an enemy player, you all have to work together, right? And when that happens, it feels like a big moment and you like all cheer. And then at the end, depending on which team wins, especially if it's tight, like it just leads to big moments, kind of like high highs and low lows that you don't really get if you were just doing it on your own. It's often pretty crass to celebrate a lone win, but like it's just part of the spirit of a team game. I love those moments.
It's interesting because I don't know that I felt like Daniel and I were like doing anything that teamy in War of the Ring, the card game. I think that it would probably improve on subsequent plays. And I know, there are a lot of restrictions often in these team-based games that prevent you from maybe talking about what your cards are explicitly. So it's a little like the question I have is, what is the difference if everything is public information? What is the difference between a 2v2 game and a 1v1 game? And is there a difference?
I think so. I think it comes down to like the comparison to sport a little bit, right? Guards does this, War of the Ring does this.
Okay, but a sport, right, has mechanical dexterity where people have to do a thing. In a game where you're taking turns and you can see everything and you can discuss everything, one player, if you've got, I don't know, what's a good athlete, Mark? Doug Peterson? Michael Jordan?
Michael Jordan, Lionel Messi.
What about a Klay Thompson?
Klay Thompson, that works. Sure.
So if you're playing 2v2 tennis and Michael Jordan's on your team, but he actually gets to hit the racket every time, right? There's no difference. You don't even need to be there. I don't need to be on the field if I've got Michael Jordan in my tennis game.
Yeah, but I think like
a turn-based tennis game.
I think like any doubles partnership would say that like some of that is just some of it's reading your teammate a little bit, right? And I think that that's the thing that some of these games try to replicate with their imperfect information. So War of the Ring actually has exactly the same system as Gods of Atlantis does, which is that you are not allowed to show your cards to your teammate. You're not allowed to be very explicit. You can talk openly, but anything you say is being heard by the other team. You can't have private conversations. And I think what that is trying to do, like in the context of MOBA games like League of Legends, those happen so quickly that it's almost just instinct. You see your teammate step forward into just one step forward towards the enemy, and I know what they're about to do, and you follow up in that in the perfect combo. And Guards is hoping you're going to be able to intuit that based on the situation in what is ultimately you're not going to have that time to like really plan it out deliberately, because then otherwise you may as well just be one big brain playing with all of the components, right? It's a little bit about my best case scenario intermingling with your best case scenario, and does that work effectively as a team?
And you sort of have to have those communication restrictions, because you don't have to, but I think in games like Pandemic, which is obviously a fantastic game, but games where quarterbacking can happen naturally because everything is shared, you might as well play one player. I think that is, at least for me, a negative in those sort of team-based games where it's basically might as well play a single person. If there isn't a restriction, if there isn't something that limits you from knowing all the information, then it makes for a worse, I think, team-based game.
And it also just slows it down, right? Like that's, I think, primarily a lot of the purpose is just to keep the game moving.
I do think that those are different. So it's imperfect information or simultaneous play as a way to force more individual play in what is a team-based game. I think one thing that I usually hate, but don't in this specific element because I'm a hypocrite, is the variant of Ingenious by Reiner Knizia, one of my top 50 games of all time. I love the team version, but don't particularly love it as much as a two-player game. There's just something lighter and looser about playing it where you can't explicitly say what the tiles that you have are, I believe is the rule, but you kind of sort of, well, it'd be good if we, short up our blue over here. I see what you're doing. Or even just having to look at what they're doing and intuit how you might assist in what they're doing. But that does lead to other types of games which are very, I would say, stressful, even more stressful than non-team-based games. So these, for me, are some of the card shedding. The card, the Tichu, right, is the one that comes, I think, Bridge for all the old tryhards and Tichu for all us new folks. But Tichu is a shedding game that is just a best-in-class partnership game, which I think is where the origins of a lot of these team-based games. But playing Tichu with someone who's good at it is very stressful, and very often I feel like I'm making the wrong decision at every point of Tichu. Have you guys played? You guys have played Tichu?
Yes, I have, but I have the exact same apprehension whenever I play. Like, I'm totally fine, and I love playing it with people who are on my level, but as soon as you introduce somebody who is much better, especially if they're my partner, like, honestly, I'd rather have the expert be on the other side than be my partner, because if they're my partner, then I start worrying about every action I'm doing, and, there's such a way to play Tichu that I'm worried that I'm going to mess it up.
That's the exact reason I haven't played Tichu, because I've only ever been invited to games with people that know it really, really well. And I don't want to be the person that messes it up, right? I actually think that's in some ways one of the pitfalls of team games, is that there's this assumption that people are all going to be in the same skill level within a team. And sometimes they don't really work as well if you're not.
I think it's just wild how I remember reading weekly. There was a bridge column in my newspaper when I was growing up. And I'm like, it's like, oh, if someone discards the jack, they're signifying to their teammate that there's moons over hammy happening in the last triple stack of the cards that are left. And you're like, what?
Weren't those columns all about some series of actions in the question be, what should you play next?
Yeah, it would lay out a situation, and then I feel like an expert, like an Ask Dr. Laura Schlesinger, would be like, what should I do on this bridge hand? And then, a verdict would come out, and it'd be just like you were in court with a real judge. There are other more traditional board games that have implemented team modes. I have played, for example, Ticket to Ride Asia, I believe, Volume 1. I think it's one of the first bigger expansions they did, and this was a team-based variant. I guess Ticket to Ride is basically Rummy, which makes it a card game, so it's a partnership card game, so it's the same thing, Kellen. But there have been other board games that have tried team variants. Mark, I know you have played one because I skewered. How does one scour an archive? Is that it?
Yeah.
Do you scour an archive?
I do.
How would you if you were a rat? You wouldn't scour the archive. You would.
I'd scamper across.
How do you get through? Scamper? No, I think is there a scurry?
What? Scamper is way better than scurry.
Yeah, you would. No, a dog.
I knew what Kellen was going for.
A dog would scamper. A rat would scurry.
Okay. That's actually not a bad difference. I'll give you that.
Of course it's not. Yeah.
Wait, so why was I a rat again?
No.
Oh, okay.
I was just, it's another word for scour, but you said scamper, he said scurry. Anyway, here we are.
Neither of those words is another word for scour, but go on.
Well, nothing is clear.
That's true. That's
in
true.
the second re-record. Yeah. We're all taking each other's jokes, so something is happening. But I know in two ways. I know because I
scampered.
Skewered? Scampered?
Scurried.
So I scurried through the archive, and I saw that Mark had played Concordia Venus. And then we recorded the first episode, the alpha version of episode 243, and I also found out that he had played Concordia Venus.
When I told you I did.
Mark... Well, this is after the scurrying.
Sure.
Okay. Mark, Concordia Venus,
yes.
A team-based Euro game. Tell us about your misgivings.
Yes, and this is what I was talking about when I talked about misgivings in Euro games. The game I was thinking about is Concordia Venus, which is Concordia basically with a team version. It's sort of like the quarterbacking issue that I was referring to with co-op games, wherein it felt to me like Concordia, except your turns were sort of split between you and your teammate. And the frustration I had there is, Concordia is, not the heaviest of games, but it's certainly a midweight to, I guess, heavy game. And there's strategy, there's planning you need to do, and I can't remember the communication rules with Concordia, but I don't think you're allowed to talk to your teammate, or maybe we didn't want to do it because our opponents would hear it. And with strategy games, you don't really want to tell your opponents what you're planning to do anyway. That would sort of really hurt your play. But I didn't like it because I would start planning something, I would start working towards something on my end, and then it came to my partner's turn, and they would do something that wasn't optimal or was like leading us down a different path, and it just felt like it really hurt what I was coming to the game for, what you come to Euro games for, that building something, that efficiency, that strategy, that planning, that thinking ahead.
But isn't that another layer of complexity that accentuates the human part of what we're doing here, which is like, because in a Euro game, you do have to contend with what the other players are doing, right? Like you have to look at what they're going to acquire before you or how that interacts with what you might have. And isn't having to think about that, but as it relates to your own teammate, isn't that philosophically something that you would say could be interesting?
Yeah, that is an interesting way to look at it for sure. And perhaps if I'd gone into it thinking that way, maybe although to be honest, I don't think it would have improved my feeling about it, just because I just don't want that variable coming to me in a Euro game from my teammate. I agree with you that if you look at it one way as like, hey, this is just another variable to work through, it does theoretically feel interesting or sound interesting. But in practice, at least for that game I had of it, where I'm planning something, I've got the cards, I'm working, okay, this is the way we should be going, and then suddenly the other person is working against that, it just felt like suboptimal, or not fun, I should say, for a Euro game.
I think one of the things that kind of strikes me there, right, is that like you have some existing familiarity with Concordia. So I could believe that layering on the team mechanic to that just butts up against your head of like how Concordia is meant to be played a little bit, right? And I'm actually almost inclined to say that most, with some exceptions, like Callan's Ticket to Ride example, most games that are not designed as team games, it would be pretty hard to retrofit into good team games. That would just be like my completely fabricated, but I believe it to be true take.
Although it's interesting, Kellen bringing that point up of seeing it as another variable in the game. As Neelan just said, Concordia doesn't seem to be designed for that, but it would be interesting to see a Euro game designed with that in mind. That would be sort of a fun take. And as we have mentioned, before, this seems to be like an open space, this like team Euro space.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like a smaller shared infrastructure in a way.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different ways to do this. And I think there are other games that we want to, I know there are other games we want to highlight because, again, we've already recorded this episode once. But there is a whole genre that we haven't said, which is what Feed the Kraken is, which is like the hidden alliance team sort of game where, your information is obfuscated by like, you don't know who's on your team or you're trying to figure out who is on your team. And I think those are perhaps the most widely successful version of team-based games. And there's a whole lot of these, and they're a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, and I would say some of them that like skew closer to what traditional social deduction would be, but something like Shadowhunters, which I think, is obviously like 50% a social deduction game, is a weird battling game where you don't know who's on your team, and like part of the process is just like trying to figure out, like I might hurt you now, but you might turn out to be on my team and vice versa. And there's not a lot of social deduction per se in that, but it does feel like adjacent to the same genre. But I kind of like that. I've always liked that style of team game where it's just a little bit of trying to suss out who's on your team more than anything else.
Yeah, I think that one of the ways that this type of gaming is just so differentiated is, I specifically remember when we played Feed the Kraken, I like wanted Neelan to be on my team. It's like so rare that he would act in a way that would make me feel like we had camaraderie or that we were working on something together. So for that social contract of that hour of Feed the Kraken, I was like, wouldn't it be nice if we were teammates for this one?
I mean, I know that if I had the opportunity to turn someone into a cultist, it would have been you, Callan.
Thank you for
You're welcome.
touching me with your tentacle. And again, that's in the rule book.
Yep.
That's not... No funny business. That's in the rule book. All right, let's go around and highlight some team games that we wanted to make sure we hit in this episode. I do feel like there's less than I expected when we set out. And add to Mark's point or my point from the Alpha episode, but again, we're stealing from each other very liberally. There is room here for more, and I would love to see more.
Yeah, I feel like when it comes to team-based games, you get a lot of like the co-op stuff, you get social deduction stuff, there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of like a one versus many like dungeon crawlers and stuff like that, or just one versus many in general. Hidden movement games, you get the team thing, but Team Euro games I think is a little rarer. But one game that I did want to highlight, and sort of along the lines of the Shadowhunters, as Neelan mentioned, a game where you don't know your teammate to start is Inkognito, which is a game from the mid-late 80s actually. And this is a game where you know what your character is at the beginning of the game, and you know which character is a teammate to your character. You just don't know who around the table is that player. So it's a game of like deduction and sharing information stealthily to try to figure out A, who your teammate is, and then B, what your mission is. Because in the game, the way that you win is that you figure out who your teammate is, and then you both have to go to a certain spot on the map, and then you're trying to do that before the other two players figure out their teammates and go to the same spot. And the thing that I love about Inkognito is the way that the game resolves itself, the way that you win is that if you think you know your teammate and you think you're in the right spot, then at the same time, you're supposed to stand up and shake hands. And then if you've done it right, you win the game. And I just love that sort of like paranoia you get whenever you play Inkognito. It's like, okay, I think Neelan's my teammate. I think I've passed him enough information to know that he should go to spot 8 and I should go to spot 15. And we're getting there. But first of all, is Neelan my teammate? Am I sure about that? Is he leading me astray? Is he pretending to be my teammate by giving me this information, but really he's teammates with Kellen? And so there's that rush, like, hey, we're in the right spot. And then you stand up and you shake hands, and it's just like a really fun, it feels like there's this simmering of information. There's simmering. And then all of a sudden it explodes when somebody stands up. And it's just a game that has a lot of faults otherwise, but just very interesting in the team genre of Euro games, and one that I always like for that aspect of it.
Yeah, as much as I'd like to see more pure team games in the line of like maybe some of the Euros that don't exist that should, I do kind of love games like that mess with the team dynamic. So, I mean, this is maybe not exactly the best example, but Between Two Cities, for example, you're effectively on two teams simultaneously. You're on the team with the person to your right, you're on the team with the person to your left, but there is only one winner, and it's whoever is able to best manage both of their teams. It's a weird inverse of like the traditional like team format in a way that I think is super effective.
Yeah, it's so hard to find examples, and definitely put the call out if you've got some unique team-based games that you think we should check out. I would love the recommendations at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com, or in our Discord, or in our Facebook group, or wherever you can reach out to us. I think I would be remiss not to mention Ladies and Gentlemen, which as a theme is probably not aged super great from when it came out in 2013, but you're in teams of two, and you're playing like a different game where the men are amassing money for their partner, who is the woman who is spending the money. And, you know, that sort of like push and pull, give and take of different styles of games that are happening, but as a team is just fun and unique. And I think that what I'm craving, and I love the like I betray you and now I win, you know, that's my favorite genre ever. But there is something more pure about knowing that you have a teammate who for the rest of this game is socially obligated to do everything they can to help you. And, you know, as the world sort of spins into chaos, wouldn't it be great to know for that hour that someone has all of the best intentions towards you? See what I'm saying?
That is the dream we all have.
That is what we all have. Any last games that we want to highlight?
Now that I'm reminded about a game I did speak about earlier, which was Space Cadets and Captain Sonar, like games that have, similar to Ladies and Gentlemen, that very intense asymmetry within the team. So like you have very specific assigned roles in both of those games. One player is the captain, one player is the gunner, someone else is managing the engines, what have you. And everyone has a predefined role, and they have to work in tandem with the rest of the team to do really well. That is a design that only seems to exist like in that very specific format of like navigating a ship around. And I'd like to see more team games do stuff with that, where it kind of feels like you have very specific specializations in a large team, and you sort of have to come together effectively to make that team work.
Totally. I wish that I liked Captain Sonar more. I just have such a hard time with real-time games. Yeah. But the format is certainly super great. All right. I think that might do it for this, the Omega episode 243. We want more team games. I do think it taps something. I think it makes you feel a certain way, and there are some real highs that you can't get otherwise. And I think that's why some of these games pop. But I think that there's room. Designers, get in there. Reach out to us.
If you need any help, we're here for you.
I had a good joke for the end of this, but now I can't remember because this is about when Nealon seppuku'd us.
Well, don't worry. I have a button on the end of this thing that'll...
Oh, no, Mark.
Just get
Mark.
through the end roll, and then I can do the
All right.
bow tie.
All right, I'll do it. Thank you so much to listening to this very special episode of episode 243.
The greatest version of 243 ever made, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah. On a redo, when Kellen's jokes are being said by Nealon and Mark, and Mark's smart points are being said by Kellen, and Nealon's fun facts, and it's all mixed up, but here we are, and here we go. You can find us in all forms of social media, BoardGameBarrage.com, BoardGameBarrage@gmail.com. You can find us on Discord at BoardGameBarrage.com/Discord. You can find our Facebook group. You can find our Board Game Geek Guild. You can find us on every social media platform ever except for TikTok. Thank you so much to Heart Society for our song, What's on Your Mind, Kid, from their album, Wake the Queens. Good evening and good night.
Oh, no, it happened again.
Oh, my God.
Long before he was the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and even before he won a Super Bowl as the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, Doug Peterson, his claim to fame was he was a journeyman quarterback. He couldn't get a starting job anywhere. He bounced around the league. Nealon, are you paying attention?
No.
Okay, great. But his claim to fame was that during his stint with the Miami Dolphins, which was the team that I used to follow back when I followed football religiously, he was coached by Don Shula, who became the winningest coach in NFL history. And you know who the starting quarterback was for Don Shula when he became the winningest coach in football history? Not Dan Marino, not Scott Mitchell, who were quarterbacks that played under Shula for years and years and years, not Bob Greasy, but Doug Peterson.
I like him.
Doug Peterson. So listen to his words, because he knows what he's talking about. Goodbye and adieu.
All right, so 3 and 2 and 1. I added the ands there just to trip you up. How did that go?
You got me.
We did pretty good.
Yeah, no.
Over here, it's pretty good. Man, this is going to be weird. I'm not a joke repeater. Okay. I'm serious. I don't know how to do it, but
No, I know.
We'll do it. Are you ready?
Yes.
Yep. This is what you do when you don't stick to the script from the first recording.
Well, yeah, I've tried. Okay, it's very hard to have a discussion-based thing where we're discussing and pushing and pulling, but we've already discussed it once, Nealon. You already know how I'm going to outlogic you, and now I got to come up with new ways to poke and prod. No, I think that there are a ton. So that part outro, this part realtro. Here we are.
Well, speaking of outro, do you want me to mention that? Do you mean to use that at all?
What do you mean?
The whole spreadically bored. I thought there was something
Probably
derogatory you said. Okay, I'll listen to it. Okay.
Well, it's not derogatory.
I thought there was some phrase you used, but maybe I can't remember. I don't remember. Whatever.
It was something about to make them sound super smart. Anyway, yeah, you can just get around that, I think.
We'll figure it out.
Wait, are you talking about in the alpha version or the omega version?
I'm talking about the delta version in between.
The current version.
Yeah, right.
Wait, where we are now?
No, where we were before.
Where we when?
But now we're where we are now.
I'm actually honestly lost. But what I would say is, if I did anything funny, keep it.
Done.
Yeah, Mark, just go through both recordings and find
Yeah, exactly.
the things from all of us. Yeah.
That's 2 chances. Double. They're not going to get all the jokes that he could be, maybe might be, isn't. And now
it's important that we keep that one in version 2.
They're not going to understand, Mark. I don't.
Well, I blame it on Nealon.
All right, and say goodbye.
I said goodbye and adieu.
Bye.
I
Bye.
spoke to the French people.
Oh yeah, gotcha.